Everybody, welcome. Welcome to our session all about the new Duolingo for schools. My name is Bridget and I am here with my colleague Parker, and we're really excited to bring you through and talk about some of these changes today. Parker is going to be in the chat as well, moderating, answering any questions that you may have. So please feel free to utilize the chat feature. Hey everybody, good morning. And in the chat, if you could, just to start off, let us know what you teach, where you teach, and how long you've been using Duolingo for Schools, whether or not you're new to Duolingo for Schools or you've been using it a long time. We'd be really curious. Hey, everybody. And we'll do some introductions as well. I'll introduce myself for those of you who do not know me. I just said my name is Bridget. I work for Duolingo for Schools, specifically running our educators network on Facebook. And if you're not a member, I'm going to be talking about it a little later today as well, and inviting you to join us. We're a couple thousand private Facebook group of international teachers who utilize Duolingo. And so we're always sharing resources and advice as well. And Duolingo staff is there too to always answer questions. So Parker, I'll let you introduce yourself too.
For sure. Hi, everyone. So my name is Parker Henry. I am, my role is an educational content developer at Duolingo. And really my time is kind of split between two areas at the company. So like half my time I'm developing curriculum for the courses that you use on Duolingo. So some of the questions that you see, I have a hand in, and a lot of the learning materials I work on. But then the other half of my time, I'm on the Duolingo for Schools team. So it puts me in a really good position. I'm like thinking about how we can best develop our curriculum with teachers in mind. And I'm also thinking about how our schools product can best leverage the curriculum that we already have. So I have been following this update for a long time, and I'm happy to answer questions about it and talk about it, and talk about how it can really be useful for teachers as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Parker. I do have an icebreaker question as well. Sorry if you hear my dog for a moment there. I have an icebreaker question for everyone. I'm curious as to what is the best piece of advice you've ever been given, whether that's personally or professionally? Yes, that's my dog Lucky in the background. I muted myself for a second. So let me know, what is the best piece of advice you've ever been given, either personally or professionally? Parker, do you have any advice you've been given when you were teaching, for example, or even personal advice?
Oh, I'm gonna do one teaching advice and one personal advice. So I'd say the best teaching advice I got was that if you don't take care of yourself, you can't show up as a good teacher. And it was framed to me as like, if you don't take care of Parker, you can't show up as Mr. Henry. So I think that's good professional advice. And then personal advice, I love bagels. And whenever I go to a bagel restaurant, the most expensive bagel has smoked salmon, and I always feel bad ordering it. But my mom once told me, like, if that's what you want, you're worth it. So I always order bagel with salmon now.
I love that. Both of those pieces of advice are very much centered around the fact that you're worth it and you need to be taking care of you, right?
Yes.
I love that. So for me, a piece of advice, I don't think I was given this piece of advice, but it's advice that I started to live by when I was teaching. And like I said, I don't know where I picked this up from, but it's advice I'd like to give to everyone here. And it's something we talked about in the Educators Network as well. But just the fact that don't be afraid to make mistakes in class and be honest with your students that you're making those mistakes, right? Especially I feel with language learning, I mean, that's how we learn, right? I mean, with any learning, right? But with languages in particular, I'd always tell my students that I'm still learning. Languages are living, they're changing. As native speakers, we make mistakes in our native language as well. So it's totally normal. So I felt like that was just some mantra that I started to live by in the classroom, is I'd always be really honest whenever I'd make a mistake. And I remember other teachers would be like, I would catch a mistake in a worksheet I did or something, and other teachers would be like, oh, you don't have to mention it. And I'd be like, no, I want my students to know that I made a mistake, that I'm human and I'm still learning, and that's totally fine, right? So that's my advice. I'm curious as to some advice that we're getting in the chat. Work smarter, not harder. Love it.
Pick your battles, which is important.
What was another one? What did you see?
Pick your battles, I see, which I think I resonate with.
Yep. Is it really worth your energy? Certain battles. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can't have perfectionism with language. Some students struggle with that. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you're just never going to be perfect, right? We make mistakes in our native language all the time. So we have to really normalize that for our students. Yeah, amazing. Well, a little bit of, as I mentioned, Parker's here to help answer questions. Parker will be popping in and out as well on the stage here. And we're going to be actually staying a couple minutes after the session. And Parker will be back on stage with me and answering any questions there then as well. But feel free to answer questions during the session too. And I'm also going to be talking about an opportunity to get swag for your classroom at the end of our session. So make sure you stick around for that as well. But Parker, I'll invite you on stage a little later on. How's that sound?
Sounds good. See you all later. I'll be back at the end.
All right, see you then. Okay, so let's get started. So as I mentioned, we're talking about the teacher guide to the new Duolingo for schools. So first, let's talk about the path and the student experience. Just a little disclaimer before I do want to mention that our learning scientists worked really hard to get the path implemented, and they're constantly working to implement changes that will make learning on Duolingo even more fun and effective. So if you see something that changes on your account, some differences, that's totally okay. So we're always implementing new things, as I mentioned, testing out new things. But please know that any changes that you see on your accounts, we're also making those changes for your students as well, so that both you and your students are all seeing the same thing. So just keep that in mind. As far as the student path, some of the biggest differences you are going to notice is it's a one singular linear path as opposed to a tree. A couple other things are for those courses that have stories, you'll see that stories are now built into the path. And for those courses that have had tips in the past, you're now going to see a guidebook at the top where it says right next to the unit. You're going to see a guidebook, and that's going to be available for both your students as well as yourself through the teacher dashboard. So let's dive into the path a little bit more and talk about some of these changes. So as I mentioned, the home screen is now designed as a path that you're going to follow step by step. One node or circle on the path is going to be equivalent to one crown level of a skill on the old home screen. Lesson content is the same, but now lessons are ordered so that you learn a mix of concepts. And we've actually previously recommended this exact learning method, so we made it the default. And you're going to notice too, lessons are grouped into smaller units. Practice is also built into your path, so you're not going to have to worry about jumping around or going back to old cracked skills to practice them. And as I mentioned before as well, we've made some of our available learning features easier to find. We have those stories built into the path as opposed to a separate tab for the stories. We have the guidebooks built in as well. So we see it in this image here right next to where it says Unit 1. We see a little guidebook icon. So your students are able to click that and see what they'll be learning in that unit. And you're also going to see too some of our animated characters cheering you along the way. So it's just a fun, engaging way to keep your students motivated and excited as they move down the path. So the ordering of lessons in this path is grounded in spaced repetition. And if you haven't heard about spaced repetition before, it is a strategy firmly supported by learning science research. Basically, it's more effective to space out practice for a particular concept than it is to cram. So when you initially learn a concept, you're going to want to revisit it fairly soon after, but then you can gradually expand the time between practice sessions. This strategy helps concepts stick in your memory long term. So what we've previously called the hover method, and some people actually called it as well the waterfall method, you might have heard. This was actually our recommended way to practice Duolingo before in the tree, but now we've made it the standard way. As I mentioned, you're going to see a mix of lessons with some that cover brand new concepts and some that cover previously introduced concepts you need to review. So we see this in this visual, how exactly that looks. We see one node, each circle in the path, is equivalent to one crown level of a skill on the old home screen. And I'm actually going to invite Parker back up to stage. Parker, if you don't mind, I'm going to invite you back up. And Parker's going to talk a little bit more about these circles and these nodes and how they are equivalent to these crown levels. Hi again, Parker.
Yeah. Hi. Thanks, Bridget. So I think we have a pretty good visual on the screen now. We can see on the left, we have 3 circles with an umbrella on it. And on the right, we see the learning path that we now have on the app. Those umbrella circles look kind of like the skills that we had on the tree or the version 1 screen of Duolingo. So some people, like Bridget was saying, go like really deep into each of these lessons. They practice, and they cram until the whole skill becomes purple or legendary. We really prefer for people to visit, be introduced to new content and then revisit it with intervals throughout the path. So you can kind of see that first purple umbrella is where you'll encounter this new content. Then you'll do something else in the next circle, and then you'll revisit that content in the 3rd circle. Then you'll move on, you'll do a story, you'll do a couple other pieces of content, and then that content that is in the umbrella node will show up again toward the bottom of the path for you to really lock in that knowledge and really show that you've mastered it. And so by spacing out the same content within the path, we can really ensure that learners are getting that spaced repetition that we think is really good for learning.
Thanks, Parker. I appreciate it. Thanks. And if there's any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat as well, and Parker's going to be there answering them. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the teacher dashboard and some of the changes there as well. So let's take a look at one of the biggest changes is actually we see this in this visual here. We see this manage students icon. So you're able to click that and you could see something called view course progress. When you click that, you're going to see a really nice visual of where each student is in the path for the language that the class is learning in comparison to all of the units of the course. So we're seeing that in that visual here. So it's a really great snapshot to see exactly what each student is learning and where they are specifically with the course. Oops, I went a little too fast there. So the next thing that I wanted to mention is you're also going to see your student's image in the Assign tab under each unit or lesson that they are at. So we're going to see their image as we see in this picture here. And you're also going to see in the banner, you're going to see this current students, and you could see how many of your students are in that unit. We're also going to see that the curriculum is a lot more detailed. So you could see the proficiency levels, either CEFR or ACFL, depending upon what you choose as your preferences in your classroom settings. You're going to see the amount of words, learning objectives, grammar, words introduced. We talked a little earlier, Parker was talking about the vocab introduced in each specific node, and this is where you're going to be able to see that. So we see all of the lessons and exactly which vocab words are being introduced. And when you click on a lesson within a unit, to the right of that, you're going to see the amount of students who've completed that lesson, as well as under you see something called related. And Parker, I know this is something you really wanted me to mention for teachers because the section is really useful. It's especially going to be useful when we get assignment or content specific assignments back. It's coming back. I saw a couple questions about that in the chat. So it is definitely coming back. And so when that does come back, this related section is going to be really cool. So this section actually shows you lessons that have the same sentences in the same vocab laid out as easy, medium, and finally hard level. And what do I mean about easy, medium, hard? So this depends upon the output that we are asking of the students in the exercise. In this, as Parker mentioned earlier, this is scaffolded throughout each unit. So for example, something that would be more of an easy, low lift exercise is this one we see here called, well, not called, but we see which of these is the cheese, right? So we're asking students to identify or recognize vocab. Another example would be matching, finishing conversations, perhaps some early basic grammar recognition, and some other picture and matching exercise. So these are low lift exercises for your students. Then something that we would consider medium or a little bit more of a higher lift, heavier lift, would be starting to engage with the target language, but with support. So we see here, repeat the response. So students are going to have to engage with the target language, but they're going to have, but they have support. So in this case, they're simply repeating what is there on the screen for them. They may also be engaging with the target language, but writing in English, for example, forming sentences, tapping tokens in English, and engaging with the target language in that way. And then lastly, much harder, more difficult lesson, or excuse me, exercise, as well as something that's a little heavier lift, right? We see this type the missing word. So students are engaging with the target language in the target language without any support. Other examples of more difficult, heavier lift exercises would be typing freeform, no support, reading comprehension, longer form texts, examples such as that. But these are just a couple of examples. And I do want to preface that this is just a general spectrum of what we mean by easy, medium, and hard, but your students won't necessarily encounter these at every node. Your students will cycle through these lower lift to higher lift of exercises throughout the unit. So this is what we mean when we say that scaffolding is built throughout the unit. I also want to mention the ability now to filter and search by keyword. So in this image, we're seeing the filter option. So we see that you're going to have the option to filter out either the Sapphire or Aqua level, again, depending upon which you use in your settings, which you preface. And then you also have the ability to filter by content type, learning objective as well, and you're able to scroll through and take a look at some of those learning objectives. And then right next to this filter capability, you have just the ability to search. So you could search by keyword. For example, you might be wanting to search specific grammar points and when they are introduced in the path, to then be able to assign your students that content. So we're going to talk a little bit now about how do these changes benefit teachers and why we made these changes. I do have a question for you in the chat, however. I'm really curious as to whether or not you have seen any of these benefits in your classroom with your students. If you have started to use the path and the new teacher dashboard, what are some things that you have noticed, and what are some positives or things that you're excited about? And I'm going to share some of the benefits that we have identified, but I'd be really curious to know some of the benefits that you have seen in your classroom. But first, let's talk a little bit about why did we make these changes, and in what way this will be better for teachers. So one of the reasons is that one path is going to allow us to dive deeper into the content as opposed to staying shallow in level 1, for example, or going legendary in one skill at a time with no spaced repetition. Another example as to why we made these changes is that progress is a lot easier to track. So if you're in Unit 55, we know exactly what that means on the back end, and so we know if you make certain mistakes, what needs to be reinforced as you move along the path, so that it's differentiated for you and for your students. Another thing specifically for teachers as to what I mean by the progress is easier to track is in the path, or excuse me, in the tree. So in our version 1 of Duolingo, if your student was in Unit 1, they might have been internalizing everything in Unit 1 and using the hover method and jumping around skills. Whereas you have another student who is in Unit 4 but has stayed really shallow and is simply skimming everything. So in the old tree, it was hard for you as a teacher to know exactly which student has interacted with more material. Whereas now you have that capability to view course progress. You know that Unit 55 means a certain thing, and you're able to see exactly that progress for your students. And lastly, another reason for which is that we utilize external researchers who use the data to improve our products. So we're consistently, constantly measuring the effectiveness of our product. And we're using that data so that we can keep improving our product. So that way teachers such as yourselves, as well as your students, are getting the most effective learning possible. So now let me talk about some of the benefits for teachers. So students will know exactly what they need to do to progress their learning, to progress towards their learning goals. So there's no more of that, what should I do next? And what skills should I study next? There's no more of that always going in behind to practice those old skills that are cracking, right? So that's something that's really impeding your students from going, continuing down the path and making progress. So your students know exactly what they need to do in order to keep making progress in their learning language. Another example of a benefit is curriculum is a lot more detailed and better outlined on the teacher dashboard, because we know that teachers need to be able to see that to fit their classroom needs. And so we're really excited that this update to this path has allowed us to better present this information to teachers. And then lastly, another example of a benefit is you can either be hands-off with this or hands-on. And what exactly do I mean by that? By hands-off, I mean you may be utilizing this, utilizing Duolingo in your classroom and trusting the path, trusting the learning science of spaced repetition, in allowing your students to work at their own pace, knowing that the sequence is best for their learning. For example, this could be really beneficial for those of you who utilize Duolingo for extra practice outside of class time. But what I mean by hands-on is when we get those assignment lesson and unit specific assignments again, you're going to be able to choose the sequence and direct your students anywhere on the path. So this is going to be really great for those teachers who really want the content to be complementary to their curriculum or their textbook, for example. So earlier on, I showed you that search feature. So you might be introducing, the past tense to your students, and you want to assign content that's specific for that learning to complement what you're doing in the classroom. So very soon, when we get content-specific assignments again, you're going to be able to do that. So I'm going to take a pause, take a look at the chat, see if anyone has any other benefits that they've seen. I've seen the benefits of having a linear path and how students don't feel lost or overwhelmed with various branches. Looking forward to track this new outcome and changes. Yeah, that's awesome. What's some other? My students get frustrated when they can't see a certain icon that I ask them to look for on different devices. Example, last week I wanted them to use audio lessons by looking at the headphones icon. Many students had the icon, others did not. Dennis, let us know what language you teach exactly, and so we could take a look at that, and we could also contact you separately to see what exactly the issue is with that. Oh yeah, so Parker responded, so this is likely because audio lessons are only on iPhones. That makes sense. And I know that's something that our team is working on. We're definitely working on, the experience being the same on desktop versus mobile, iPhone versus Android. So that's something we're consistently making changes towards as well. So I want to talk a little bit about what's to come. So as we have mentioned, assignable units, lessons, so content-specific assignments are coming. We know how important that is for teachers. We are working on making improvements to classroom leaderboards. We're also working on additional in-class features, so features utilizing Duolingo that you could use in class. And we're also thinking about future social and engagement features for your classes. For example, one idea that we're possibly going to implement is students being able to see the progress of their classmates. For example, when they see the path, they're able to see other students' pictures, their icons as to where they are in the path so that they could cheer each other on, for example. We are always trying to add features that are most useful for teachers. So if you have other ideas, please share it with us, either here in the chat now. Please feel free to share it with Parker and I, or in our educators network. As I've mentioned, we have our private Facebook group where we're consistently asking for teachers' feedback there. Or you could always email us at educators@duolingo.com. And I'm actually going to copy and paste this in the chat so you have this email as well. So feel free to reach out to us anytime with questions, comments, concerns, or feedback as to what you'd like to see in the future. Both Parker and I were language teachers in the past, but we're not anymore. We have a lot of people on our team who have been teachers, but we're not anymore. So we know that you utilizing Duolingo for Schools with sometimes hundreds of students, you know what's best for your students and what you would like to see in the classroom. So we really value teacher feedback for that reason. So as I was mentioning how much we value teacher feedback, I also would love to get some feedback about what kind of PD sessions you'd like to see in the future. So today we talked all about the new teacher dashboard, the new student path, but I'd be really interested as to what specific questions you may have either around the product or other examples of PD specific for world language teachers that you could think of. So I would be really open to any feedback you have about that, as well as Duolingo resources. So what kind of resources would you like to see to use in your classroom? For example, perhaps certain games or worksheets that could supplement Duolingo. So let us know as well what kind of resources that you'd like to see. And as I mentioned earlier, our Educators Network is a really great way to share resources and get resources that other world language teachers are working on. For example, one of our teachers, who I don't know if she's here in the chat, she may be, Pamela, she is a French and Spanish and Japanese teacher, and she's actually created a lot of games utilizing Duolingo sentences, utilizing Duolingo, the Project World characters, and she uses these to make games such as Apples to Apples, Mad Libs. She's created a whole game called Duolingo, and she's actually shared the game board that she created, all the rules, all the game pieces with our Educators Network. So it's another great reason to join us. And I actually do have a form too. If you have specific resources that you'd really love to have in your classroom, this is a form to fill out and let us know. Or as I mentioned, always could be giving us feedback in the Educators Network or by emailing us as well. So I've been talking about the Educators Network, so I do want to share the link so that you can join if you're not a member. I'm seeing a lot of our members here in the chats, so please join us there and collaborate with us, as well as with thousands of other world language teachers around the world. If you're not on Facebook, please feel free to follow us on any of our other social media accounts. So we have Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. We have a LinkedIn account as well. So join us there and give us some feedback or collaborate with us there. So I'm going to talk now. I'll take a pause. I'll take a look at the chat, see if there's anything that I need to shout out. But I am going to talk about how you can get swag for your classroom next. But let me just take a moment, and I'm going to take a look at the chat. Ooh, it would be great if teachers could administer a quiz that is based on where their student is in the Duolingo path. That would be a really great idea for a resource. Thanks, Laura. Classroom games, worksheets would be awesome. Yeah, so a lot of, as I mentioned, a lot of teachers have created resources, games, as I was mentioning about Pamela's games, a lot of worksheets created along the stories as well as the podcast. So we have a lot of those resources that teachers have already shared. So definitely join us in the Educators Network, but we're always looking to make more. So thank you for that. So I need help finding out how to use the teacher dashboard, like what are all the features available? That's a great question. So Dennis, we actually have a YouTube channel, and I'll make sure I'm going to reach out to you. We have a YouTube channel with a Duolingo for Schools 101. where we're walking through each functionality of the teacher dashboard. So Dennis, I'm going to reach out to you to share that link with you after the session. But I'm going to talk a little bit now about giving PD and getting swag for your classroom. So if you want some swag, we are going to give the first 50 teachers who download and host any of our PD events, such as this one, talking about the new Duolingo for schools, or in the past, I've been giving PD events about gamification in the classroom, utilizing Duolingo, talking about the Duolingo podcast and how to utilize them a little bit more, talking about classroom leaderboards, talking about student streak societies and how to utilize the streaks in your classroom. So these are just some examples of past PD events that I've run. So you're able to download these slide decks that I just used to give this PD session, and actually schedule your own PD session, invite attendees, fill out a couple forms to get a swag box. In that swag box is going to include stickers, an insulated tumbler, as well as a really nice wool Duolingo for Schools beanie, as well as even more swag. So there's a lot in this box. So I could promise you that it's a swag box that you definitely want to get. So if you're maybe asking yourself, how am I going to recruit people? So here are some ideas. For example, if you have a department, a world language department at your school, we could suggest scheduling a PD session with them, seeing if you could take some PD time with them to talk through these slides. Another idea is you could be recruiting other teachers on social media and networking with other world language teachers on social media, whether that be Twitter or Facebook. You could be tagging us, we could be retweeting you, helping you find and network with other world language teachers. Or you could also be recruiting teachers through the Educators Network. So you're able to post in the Educators Network, see if there's anyone who'd like to have a PD session with you and talk through some of these past PDs that I have done. So where to find all these PD materials? So you're able to find them in the Educators Network. So right next to where the discussion tab is, you're going to see a tab called Guides. You're going to click that, and at the bottom, you're going to find something called Professional Development. There, you're going to find all of these slide decks. You're able to download them and host any of this PD. You're also going to find the presenter feedback form. And this is something that after you've recruited some teachers, you've done your PD session, you're going to fill this form out in order to get your swag. So you're going to ask you questions such as who attended, how it went, a picture, an attendee list if you have it, as well as some additional feedback about the PD session. And then you're also going to find an attendee feedback form. And we ask that you provide this to your attendees so that we can know a little bit on their end how the PD went and what kind of PD they'd like to see in the future. And if you, for example, have a department meeting, it's an hour long. This is probably about a 30-minute PD session. So you want to, beef it up, make it a work session. Here are some ideas. You could be discussing these techniques from the session, brainstorming new ideas. For this one specifically, you could be walking through the teacher dashboard together, discovering some of the new functionality of the teacher dashboard, discovering the path together. You could be breaking out into groups to brainstorm a little bit about some of these ideas and how to utilize this new functionality in the classroom. And then one really important thing is you have that actionable item, something that you could walk away from that department meeting, for example, and have a lesson plan done, ready to be implemented the following day in class, for example. So it's always really great to walk away from those department meetings having done something really, really useful for your classroom. And if you have any questions at all, you are welcome to reach out to us, as I mentioned, at educators@duolingo.com anytime. If you are new to Duolingo for Schools, such as someone in the chat was just asking me about some videos, some walkthrough about Duolingo for Schools, we do have a YouTube channel, as I mentioned, where you could find some of those videos to walk you through. We also have our help center too. You're going to find that on the left-hand side of your Duolingo for Schools dashboard. And we also have a new professional development page that you're going to find on your teacher dashboard as well. You're going to either see it listed as teacher training or webinars, and you're going to be able to follow that link and see some videos. For example, I mentioned that Duolingo for Schools 101. You'll find that video linked there as well. So thank you, everybody. As I mentioned, I'm going to invite Parker back up. So if you have any questions at all, or if I didn't, so I'm going to invite Parker back up. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them now as well. Hey, Parker, is there any burning questions that I didn't call out during the session as well that you think might be beneficial?
I see a couple folks asking for the link to the PD materials.
Yeah, let me find that link right now, actually. I'll find that right now. Any other questions?
And then I have a question. Can I host PD online like Google Meet?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, these could be, virtual PD sessions. These could be, hybrid. These could be in person. It doesn't need to only be in person. You could definitely host a virtual event. Here's our YouTube channel. If you're looking specifically for the PD materials to host these sessions, you're going to find these in the Educators Network. So I'll make sure to share that link again. If you don't have a Facebook and you're not able to join us in the Educators Network, send us an email at educators@duolingo.com, and I'll make sure to email you the materials as well. Cool. I'm a designer in the schools team. Hey, Shandy, yes, at Duolingo. So excited to build more features for you. Yes. Shandy's been working on a lot of really exciting features. Parker and I could definitely attest to that. So we're excited.
Working double time, triple time.
I hinted to some things, but I didn't want to give away too many surprises.
Yeah, I think it is good to reiterate too that our educator community really drives a lot of the work that we do. So if there are suggestions or ideas or even feedback or changes that you want, we really do take those into consideration, and we really try to build with all of you in mind. So you might think, oh, this Facebook group is big. I don't even know if my voice is really going to be heard. We listen to all comments, and we are really aware of what the network needs and what we need to build.
Absolutely. And not only am I in the Educators Network, as I mentioned, I'm the one running it, but Parker is in the Educators Network as well. Parker is seeing all these comments and what's going on in the Educators Network, as well as so many other members of our team. So we're all there listening to you. And as Parker mentioned, so many of these features, such as classroom leaderboards, which is a new feature this year, this came from the Educators Network as well. So I know a lot of feedback that we take is implemented in the product directly. Awesome. And I see a question, do the attendees have to use Duolingo? That's a great question. So your attendees don't have to be currently using Duolingo for Schools, but you could perhaps be introducing them to Duolingo for Schools and getting them excited to utilize Duolingo. So they don't have to be current Duolingo for Schools users. That's a good question. Thanks, everybody. My students, even if they don't want to admit it, really enjoy the lessons on Duolingo. Yeah, there's so many engaging features that get your students hooked. As I mentioned earlier, a couple weeks ago, I gave a PD session specifically about the streaks. And there's so much learning science behind the streaks and as to why you don't want to lose your streak, right? We tap into something called loss aversion. So your students start to get really excited as they see that number build up, and they don't want to lose it, right? And then we have the notifications, so to remind you to be always doing lessons and keeping your streak. So all these engaging features get students hooked on language learning. We have Rigoberto sharing a TikTok that he's done. Rigoberto is our Duolingo musician. He's always making amazing Duolingo songs. I must admit, Rigoberto, your songs will get in my head, and I'll sing them to myself sometimes. I also like the different voices of the characters. One of the favorite stories was the one when the girl sent her baby photo to the boy she liked, but it was supposed to go to her mom. Oh, my students will randomly say auxilio in her voice when they need help. I love it.
I think that's like a great way to like really lock in that vocabulary word or really memorize it with this like kind of funny context, which is what the stories are great
Yeah,
for.
absolutely. I mean, so many of our sentences, right, are just silly sentences to really stick, get you memorizing these sentences, right?
Yeah, there is science behind it.
Absolutely. Are you making a Lily plushie? I don't know. That would be a great idea, though, if we made a Lily plushie.
Mm. If you follow Duolingo on TikTok, we do have a Lily
That's true.
suit, so you might see her on
That's
TikTok.
true.
I don't know about Plucky.
And for those of you who don't know, Parker has quite often been in the duo suit.
There's no suit. That's the owl.
That's the secret. Oh yes, yes, that's the secret. All right, thanks everybody. Thanks for being here, and I hope to see you in the Educators Network. Yeah, so we'll see you there. Thanks, Parker.
Sure. Thanks, Bridget. See you all
Bye,
later.
everybody.
Thanks for joining. Bye.